Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know that feeling, right? Like opening your mailbox and bam, it's an IRS audit letter.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not all of us.
Right.
But still, today we're going deep on a study about, well, who gets audited and why. And get this, turns out like a huge chunk of those audits, all about one thing, the Earned Income Tax Credit.
The EITC.
Right, the EITC.
Yeah, the EITC is, it's meant to be this financial boost for working Americans, especially those in lower income brackets. And it's massive. I mean, it lifts millions out of poverty. But because of that, because it's so big, it's a prime target for audits.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, because, think about it. With so much money going out, the IRS, they want to make sure it's going to the right people.
Right. Yeah, totally. So it's like this balancing act almost between providing a safety net and, making sure that no one's taking advantage of the system. But here's where it gets even more interesting. We're not just talking about audits in general here. This deep dive is about, potential racial disparities in who gets audited by the IRS.
And that's where this study gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because believe it or not, the IRS, they don't actually collect data on race.
Wait, seriously. So how do you even begin to study racial disparities in audits if you don't even know, who's what race?
That's the million-dollar question. These researchers, they came up with a pretty ingenious way to tackle that.
So how do you figure that out? How do you figure out racial disparities when the IRS isn't even tracking race?
Well, these researchers, they got really clever. They basically used names and addresses to, to try to predict race.
Hold on. Wait, that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How is that even possible to predict someone's race just from their name and where they live?
Yeah. It sounds a little crazy, I know. But they used a technique called, get this, Bayesian improved first name and surname geocoding. Yeah, it's a mouthful. But basically, they used a huge database. And this database links names and addresses with the probability of someone belonging to a certain racial group.
Okay, so they're saying your name and then where you live can give you clues about your race.
Exactly. Think about it this way, right? Certain names, they're more common among certain ethnic groups, right?
Okay.
And neighborhoods, they often have, different racial makeups. So if you combine those two things, that information, you can actually make a pretty educated guess about someone's race.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess. But then how do you know if those guesses are actually right? We're talking about something as sensitive as race here. You can't just be relying on guesses, right?
No, you're absolutely right. And the researchers, they knew that. So to test it out, they got their hands on some, get this, voter registration records from North Carolina.
North Carolina. Why North Carolina?
Because, and this is key, North Carolina, they used to collect race data on their voter registration forms. So they could check their predictions against the actual data.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. So they matched up a bunch of tax records with these voter registration records, and you're not going to believe this, but their predictions, they actually lined up incredibly well, surprisingly well, with how people actually identified.
Wow, so this wasn't just some algorithm spitting out random numbers. They actually made sure it was as accurate as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. They did their due diligence.
Yeah.
And once they were confident in their method, they felt good about it. Then they could finally start, digging into that data to see if there were any patterns, about who's getting audited.
Okay, and what did they find? Give me the good stuff.
Well, the results were they were pretty eye-opening, even after they accounted for things, like income, filing status, all those other factors that might make someone more likely to be audited.
Yeah.
Black taxpayers were more likely to be audited.
Yeah.
Than non-black taxpayers.
Seriously, even with all of those other controls in place.
Yeah.
That's concerning, to say the least.
It is concerning. And it gets even more troubling when you look at who's being disproportionately affected within that group.
You mean different income levels?
Yeah, exactly. The disparity, it was particularly big among lower income taxpayers, those claiming the EITC.
So the people who are really relying on this program to make ends meet are the ones who are facing more scrutiny from the IRS. That seems kind of backwards.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's why this study it's so important, because it shines a light on this disparity that we might not even know existed otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. But like knowing there's a problem, that's just the first step, right? Like we need to figure out why. Why is this happening? So we've seen this like difference in who's getting audited, right? Especially folks depending on the EITC. It's not like anyone's saying the IRS is, out to get black taxpayers, right?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely more complicated than just like straight up discrimination.
Yeah.
The researchers, they really dug into this idea of underreporting on tax returns, which isn't always, intentional tax evasion.
Dang, okay, so like what are we talking about here? Just like, those little math errors we all make and hope the IRS doesn't notice.
Yeah, sometimes it's that simple. Honest mistakes, Or maybe someone they misunderstood some, complex tax rule. I mean, let's be real, those forms are not exactly, written for everyone to understand.
Yeah, especially with the EITC. All those rules and requirements.
Exactly. And what the researchers were thinking was maybe this big focus on, underreporting, especially when it comes to like overclaimed refundable credits, that might be a part of what's driving this disparity we're seeing. Because those overclaimed credits, they're more common among EITC recipients.
Oh, I see. So even if like everyone makes mistakes at the same rate, because the IRS is like really focused on those specific overclaims, it ends up, auditing more black taxpayers just by like the nature of it.
Yeah, that's the theory. And it brings up some big questions about priorities, right? Are we, even without meaning to, putting a heavier burden on certain groups, even if the system is supposed to be fair?
It's like, it makes you realize that even if something's designed to be neutral, it can still have these like ripple effects that we don't always see. But here's the really cool part. They didn't just stop at like identifying the problem. They actually tested out like different approaches. Tell me about this counterfactual analysis thing.
So it's basically like they got to play what if with all the data, right?
Right.
They ran these simulations to see how different algorithms, for selecting who gets audited, how those different methods might shake things up.
So different ways of deciding who gets audited. Okay, so how does that work?
Okay, so they tested out two new algorithms. One of them, it shifted things away from just those refundable credits. And instead, it was all about maximizing detection of like any kind of underreporting. Didn't matter if it was a credit or not, just how much was underreported total. And then the second algorithm, that one used machine learning to try and better predict those refundable credit overclaims we talked about.
So two different approaches with different goals. What happened?
Well, the findings, they were pretty amazing, honestly. When they shifted to looking at total underreporting, instead of zeroing in on just those refundable credits, the racial disparity in audits, it went down significantly.
So just by like broadening the scope, you could potentially make things more even. Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's promising, right? But and there's always a but. This change, could mean higher costs for the IRS because now they're looking more at business income, which is way more complex to audit.
So it's a trade-off then, like reduce disparity, but it might be more expensive for the government to do it that way?
Exactly. And that's a tough question, right, for policymakers. Could the fact that they're catching more underreporting overall, which means more tax revenue, could that outweigh those extra costs? It's complicated.
This deep dive has been wild. We started with like tax audits, which, let's be real, not the most thrilling topic. And we ended up in this whole discussion about like fairness and equity and how even systems that are meant to be good can have these like unintended consequences.
And the thing is, we've just scratched the surface here. This whole study was about how audits are selected. But what about the rest of it? Appeals, settlements, all that. Could there be disparities there too? Something to think about.
Seriously, so much to consider. We learned about this racial disparity in IRS audits. We dug into some potential reasons behind it, and we even got a glimpse of how like different approaches could actually change the whole system. But this isn't just, some abstract thing. These findings, they have real impact. By talking about it, by bringing it to light, that's how we can start asking the right questions, demanding more transparency, and pushing for a tax system that's actually fair for everybody.
And that's what's so great about these deep dives, They let us really question what we think we know, think critically, and hopefully push for a world that's more just and equitable for everyone. So keep questioning, keep digging, keep the conversations going.